Here in person again.
Awesome, Chris. So why don't we start with just a little background about you, so the audience knows a little bit what you do at Coca-Cola.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, and thanks, Paul, for the intro too. I'm Chris Elliott. So I work in end-to-end connections and media at the Coca-Cola Company, joining today from Atlanta. When I say end-to-end connections and media, we at Coca-Cola actually view that as two distinct disciplines. When I say end-to-end connections, that's really all about consumer-first journey development across owned, earned, shared, paid touch points. And then media, of course, a little more self-explanatory there, and where we'll be spending the time today. In my role, I specifically oversee the flavors and nutrition brands within our beverage portfolio in the US. I've been here at the company for a little over 5 years at this point, jumping over from the agency world, where I spent some time both at IPG and WPP agencies, but excited to be here today and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome, awesome. Thanks for that, Chris. And for those that don't know me, I'm the founder CEO of MobileFuse, which is essentially a moments-based platform that covers video, CTV, mobile, digital out of home. And we've been around for 12 years, so we're beyond the startup these days. So, and what's really awesome, Chris, you know this, but the audience might not. Coca-Cola and MobileFuse through our mutual agency work on Powerade, coffee with, I'm sorry, Coke with coffee and AHA. So there's actually an established relationship before we even had this conversation. So this is really exciting. So Chris, so why don't we jump into it? So we're talking about the evolution of the video space right now. The whole audience knows that Coca-Cola, I mean, if there was such a ranking, I mean, it's top five. I'll say number one for this, right? But when you think about video and commercials, 30-second commercials, I mean, Coca-Cola has always been one of the biggest producers of content that becomes popular and synonymous with culture, right? But things are evolving, right? But before we get into all that, what kind of driven your interest here in the space, in video overall?
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like you read about the Coca-Cola things in your marketing textbook, but when it comes to video as a whole, certainly an area that I have passion around. I think view myself as a student of the industry, and I think it's one of the areas that I've seen change, the most over the course of my career thus far. And it feels like we're just getting started in that space because, I think it is pretty fascinating when you think about, video as a medium. It's one of the most effective ways that we have to tell these compelling stories at scale, but how consumers are engaging with it is evolving so rapidly. And as an advertiser, you simply cannot deploy the same approach year over year there, else I fear you might be left in the dust. So it's ever changing.
Chris, to that point, being left in the dust, right? 20 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, video was just, television in your home, right? Now it could be really anywhere, right? It could be on your mobile device. It even depends on how you bring it into your home. And then, I mean, the future is just, it boggles your mind how fast things are moving. So, to that point, how do you prepare for the future for video?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in my opinion, it really is all about future proofing and how we think about it. And within my team, we've taken an approach to really look at the video space from the perspective of, 3+ years out on where we want to be in the space, and then kind of work backward on what does that mean for, what we need to accomplish in 2021 and next year and the year after that, to really think about it a little more holistically, because quite frankly, I think it would be a bit overwhelming to future proof all at once, just given the speed of the consumer and the marketplace. And I think it's something that really requires revolution if you're going to do it right, and that takes time. And so we, from a Coca-Cola perspective, seek to keep our portfolio brands really at the forefront of that revolution, but in a measured, strategic way.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So you mentioned the speed of the consumer there, right? What dynamics are at play when it comes to the consumer's relationship with video, right? Like, I mean, everyone knows that the speed and how fast consumers are moving, right, and into different mediums and different utilizing different platforms. But what dynamics are there that you really take into account when it comes to your future planning, right, and you're preparing for the future?
Yeah, for sure. I think these may not sound surprising, but I think I'll talk about a couple of them that I feel like are most important when it comes to the consumer's relationship with video today, because there really are so many dynamics at play. I think the first one is really that the fluidity of video behaviors does make consumers harder to reach. We're seeing movement from linear to digital video at scale, with a sizable portion of that being on platforms that aren't ad supported. And then how do we think about that and approach that? I think simply put, from my perspective, we're probably reaching some people too much out there, and then others not enough when it comes to consumers we want to talk to. And I think, when you think about the fact that in live TV, something like 40% of people make up over 80% of all minutes viewed, it does, highlight a real challenge there. So I think that's
Wow,
certainly one big dynamic at
the
play.
crazy stat. Yeah.
Right. And then I think, even more so when we consider, we can't really ignore the fact that, the way that our world has changed over the last year and a half. And I think, so many of the video trends that we were all kind of anticipating and, predicting over time happened in such an accelerated way. Just, as you think back to March 2020 until now. And, from my perspective, it feels like we're really finding ourselves in a world where streaming is really that centerpiece when you think about entertainment programming, and then news, sports, events are really, proving to be so critical, for linear TV going forward. I would say a couple other things there just on that trend. I think, there's so much fragmentation by device and content. I think it won't, we all know there's more video content out there than ever before. Certainly makes our jobs more complex than they were as we try to find, the desired consumer targets. And I think on a personal level, if you can relate to anything like me, I feel like my queue of shows that I want to watch is getting quite long because there's just so much content out there. But I do think on a more serious note, to one of the more fascinating questions that we have to ask ourselves is like, how do these content partners continue to raise the revenue that they need to pay for the amount of content they're creating? We know content creation is incredibly expensive, right? So
no one's going to have 5 or 6 different. Some are going to have to add advertising to their services.
Right. It feels like it's incredibly difficult to sustain for the long term there. I think there's, you can grow subscribers there to a degree to pay for the content, but I would think eventually that levels off. And some of that weight then, probably is pushed back to the advertiser. So like, how do we think about that challenge going forward?
Right, right.
The last dynamic, I would say, kind of the third one I'll speak to, is really just, as we look toward tomorrow, some of the things that are most exciting is really when you think about from a tech perspective, what are those future consumer trends that may completely reshape video's role in the consumer's life. I think it's interesting because today, video arguably serves more of a role of convenience and choice, to in the future, how is that more utility, more experiential? And hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that a bit more in a few minutes.
Right, right. That's awesome. So, okay, so for all the marketers out there, right, we've established who you are, who I am. We've talked about the consumer trends and the dynamics there. Now let's talk about Coca-Cola a little bit. And I know you can't just share everything, but how do you take that all into account when it comes to, your, bringing video to life, right? That's what Coca-Cola has done for decades, right? How do you bring video to life with taking all of this into account?
Yeah, absolutely. So without sharing the secret recipe, I can share a few things just on some thoughts of how we think about it. It's really back to that whole idea of, future proofing as we think about the video space, which really evolves around that multi-year strategic approach. I think we could probably all agree, but I would caution anyone who's thinking about their video approach and the time bounds of the current year's annual plan or experience, because that it's just not going to work in terms of the speed that the space is moving in. Given what our current landscape is like and what it feels like we can guess about our future landscape, we need that revolutionary thinking from brands. Like, it's really almost mandatory. I don't think an evolution there will really be enough. So from my perspective and on our team as end-to-end connections and media, from a Coca-Cola perspective, we get the privilege to lead and guide the organization, when it comes to those bold moves that we need to make to really stay a step ahead with how consumers are engaging with the medium. So just a slightly small task at hand there. But in video, we think about future proofing, I would say, in three really substantial ways. The first one being future proofing our mix and our targeting. The second one being future proofing how we reimagine the way that we even define our video presence. And then the last one being future proofing by pioneering the next wave in video, if you will.
So let's drill down on those, right? Because those are each one are big topics. So where do you begin when it comes to future proofing, the mix and targeting, right? It's no longer like building out a 30-second or 60-second commercial, right? Like, so how do you start to future proof that when you think about mix and targeting and all these different options that consumers have, right?
Right, totally. Yeah, I think when it comes to mix and targeting, it's really a mix of art and science, to be honest. I think we'd be silly, of course, not to infuse historical best practices, but we've also got to adapt for consumer behavior, and that current consumer behavior is changing so rapidly, like we talked about. So that's not always quite as easy to prove out from the outset from a business perspective. So it requires a bit of balancing of both in order to make that work. And from our perspective, like I said before, I would hypothesize that we're probably reaching some people too much and others not enough, right? So then as we think about that, the more that we can think about holistic reach and frequency and taking that view is really key how we future proof video from that perspective. I will ask, would you agree, like from a MobileFuse perspective, when it comes to holistic reach and frequency, like do you guys agree, or how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, well, I could speak broadly for a lot of our clients, with over 200 of the 500 biggest brands in the world. And when we talk about specifically video, where our clients are interested, where MobileFuse could add to like that mix, right? It's not like just one solution. But what we'll bring to the table simply is, we're obviously, our company name is MobileFuse, right? So everything starts with this right here, the mobile device, and so we're tying that back to households and learning about the households from a mobile perspective and how consumers are moving throughout their day, and that way then you can target consumers, for CTV or for video based on those learnings, right? It's another option that we have found that's very great. It's great to add to the mix, right? There's your inclusion list, your traditional linear television buying, right? And it's just another way to find additional audience. And like you said, it's a different mix. So that's been, and there's a lot of scale when you do that as well, which is really important when it comes to video. So yeah, thanks for asking.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think, as we think about holistic and reach and frequency, for us, it's kind of been a mix of how do we think about that with existing partners? How do we also, bring in new third-party partners to help us understand, those offerings? And I think to that point, it is one of the more exciting things available to us today as advertisers is that ability to unlock real-time cross-platform attribution and optimization, which is really key to unlocking this part of future-proofing the space, so that we can start to answer some of those questions that we all likely have about our brands of what are optimal reach levels across video and digital platforms, what are the right frequency caps more holistically across platforms, what are are there specific mixes that work best for different consumer target audiences? And I think that's really how you begin to unlock the future proofing that's needed on this side of the space.
Cool. I want to make sure I get this right because I was writing as you've been talking, and a lot of great stuff here. So before, we obviously we're just talking about mix and targeting, but before that, you mentioned this notion of redefining video presence as a way to future-proof. What did you exactly mean by that?
Yeah. This is my personal favorite one of the couple of future proofing methods I mentioned. This one, I think it's really about finding ways to make our brands unmissable to the consumer, and that can the reality is that can certainly live outside of a 6, 15, or 30-second spot. While it might sometimes be tough with internal stakeholders who are often accustomed to seeing activity expressed in a certain way. I think it just really highlights the importance to keep a consumer-centric mindset and remember it's all about how our the messages for our brand show up holistically to the consumer. Because like I mentioned before, there's an abundance of choice out there for both the consumer and the advertiser, but that doesn't mean we have to show up in the same exact way everywhere.
Right. And my next question has to be, how does Coca-Cola bring this to life?
Sure, I can share a couple of things. When it comes to that notion of making our video presence unmissable, there are a number of ways that a brand can consider bringing that to life today. Just as one example, of we think about streaming platforms, what role could something like a pause ad play in being unmissable, but also really relevant to the moment? Because when you think about that ad that shows up as you press pause and are maybe walking away for a second, not only is that impactful, but it provides an opportunity for a clever message. Whether that's maybe nudging someone to grab a Coke and some popcorn or snack, or also the opportunity to use units like that for something more nimble in a way that's a lot faster than you can produce a new video spot. I'll use one example there. I think last year, I think all of us had to act in very nimble ways as we were navigating things in those first few months when everything changed. We of course in our business saw less people dining in and more people ordering takeout and delivery. Of course, I'm sure we all did that. And those kinds of units, were a great way to, last summer start to experiment with QR codes and video in a way that, where you could encourage and drive to ordering, your favorite Coca-Cola beverage from a given delivery partner. So just, one way that you can explore and try different things.
That's crazy how QR codes are back in vogue.
They're back and it worked this time.
I know. Sorry.
No. One thing I'll add here too, I think just when it comes to exploring these kinds of things is really this idea of experimentation. It's something that I would say we embrace in our Coca-Cola culture, but it's also been really essential for identifying those new opportunities for creating unmissable moments in video. I think working closely with our partners in the marketplace and asking those sorts of what if questions can really unlock some incredible things. And, my advice there would be, sometimes it might allow you to discover, some unmissable places you didn't even know were possible out there.
Very neat.
Yeah. So those are a few things that I would say, that we think about, but curious too, if there's anything, in the video space in terms of ways that, MobileFuse might be experimenting there as well.
Yeah, I think it's, similarly to what I was saying before, is that, video really is about reach and frequency, right? And when you talk about reach and frequency and you're only capturing a certain part of the market, how do you find the rest of the market? And I think when you have certain other solutions that you can add to the mix, like a MobileFuse, right, where there's maybe a little more targeting, a little more intelligence, right, and it's beyond just an inclusion list or a prime time spot, you can find that at the end of the day, you're building your brand and you're also looking for incremental growth, right? And that's really how you do that when it comes to whatever your overall marketing plan. So yeah, that's just one example probably of many.
Yeah.
That,
Another area, just as we think about that overall presence and like making it unmissable too, is, just thinking about all the different places that your brands show up, which, it's a little more unique to CPG here, but like, what's your willingness to count things like active and passive product placement, as a part of the overall video approach, and how do we think about that in one holistic way? Because that can also open up some of those doors in non-ad supported platforms, in which we know the consumer spending considerable time. That also gives opportunities to sometimes pull other marketing levers, outside of paid media necessarily. One I'll mention there that we all may have seen was something we did back in 2019, actually, with Netflix on the launch of the third season of Stranger Things, just set in 1985, and featured New Coke. And while we might all, remember New Coke as that flop from our marketing textbooks,
I was
well, in this case, we turned that piece of our video presence into something, much larger than, just the placement there, but really, relaunched a limited release of the product. So I got to actually like try it for the first time in my life. But then that, of course, too had runway across earned touch points. So just one example that we really loved that, unlocked a lot of other doors as you consider how that presence comes to life.
neat. Now, with all this, I wanted to ask, what's one of the coolest things that you could share that really that you think has paid off based on all of this thinking?
Yeah. So like I said, I feel like this is my favorite part of the future proofing. So I'll give you a fun one here. So before I took on my current role, I spent a few years on the Coke brand itself. And that included leading our NCAA March Madness partnership from a connections and media perspective. And something that was pretty cool within this year's March Madness tournament that our partners at and I worked together on was actually bringing virtual product placement to life in video, which I think it was really so cool. And the campaign focused on Coke flavors and this idea that, Coke flavors, whether that be a cherry vanilla Coke, cherry Coke, etc., are unbelievably delicious. So we essentially paid tribute to some of these iconic sports moments in college basketball. When we created these cutting edge 3D product models that we inserted into the scenes. And we referred to them as our unbelievable double takes, as the product then appeared in some of these most unbelievable moments in March Madness history. I brought one example to share for today, which this one's from NC State's finish in the 1983 men's basketball championship game, which cherry vanilla Coke did not exist then, unfortunately. But in the way this comes to life, it did. So if we want to roll the video.
What has Coach running, Frank?
Look at him go, Phil.
Not only him, the whole stadium.
Free cherry vanilla Coke, you gotta be kidding me.
The crowd is in a frenzy.
What did you expect? People go mad for the unbelievable taste of Coke flavors.
I can't believe it. He's helping his teammate give out cherry vanilla Coke.
Are you crying?
You just rarely see such teamwork. Some things are too unbelievable to be true, like the taste of a cherry vanilla Coke. Unbelievably delicious.
So you can see that's pretty lighthearted and fun. We created some additional content stemming from moments with other Coca-Cola partner colleges and universities. We got a little lucky there. We also created some content with UCLA, which turned out to be quite relevant when they went much further in the tournament than first anticipated. So you're always rolling a dice there a little bit. But all in all, it was just a very cool program in the sense that we were able to experiment with technology, tap into some of these historic moments in college basketball culture, and really tie seamlessly with the rest of our unbelievably delicious content in video and beyond.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, when we first started talking before, I wrote down those three areas that you brought up in the beginning. In the last area, future proofing, right, is you called it, let me see if I got this right, the pioneering the next wave in video. What can you tell us about that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think when it comes to pioneering the next wave, like I think that's one of the most fascinating when you think about all of the trends that are at play, because there are some of those trends that are already happening, and there are others that are a bit more out there. So I can mention a few of those, and just how we're thinking about it. So in terms of a few of those trends that are at play when it comes to pioneering the next wave, let's say one that we're already seeing happen, I would call the rise of ish, which is really all about the mainstreaming of niche cultures. So there's content out there that everyone can essentially see themselves in, and as we have more and more streaming platforms entering the stage, we see more content created for niche audiences. And I think that's super interesting, going back to the content creation conversation from earlier in terms of that's certainly expensive, but it does also mean that most likely your favorite quirky series probably has a better chance at a longer lifespan than maybe it did 5 or 10 years ago. Another one I'll mention, just as we think about 5G and the mobile video space there, yes, there's the speed aspect, but it's really about a lot more than speed when you consider how that's enabling new experiences. I think, of course, from a video perspective, it leads to more pervasive mobile streaming. I think that won't shock any of us, but I think when you consider what that unlocks for virtual reality or these really immersive experiences that can even duplicate cinema out there, it's super interesting. And I guess also, like, from your perspective, Ken, would you say there's anything that you would add there just in terms of the mobile streaming and the speed?
I'll tell you, when I started MobileFuse, 12 years ago, I mean, 0.5% of the internet was on mobile devices. So, and now you just fast forward, right? I mean, mobile devices are everything, right? And you can start watching a show or something on your mobile device, and you can get home and then just mirror it or transfer it to the television in your bedroom or your living room or wherever, right? It's just and then just thinking about I love the whole notion of future, right? I mean, it's you're gonna have self-driving cars, right? Like, that's another place where you could consume video. Like, whoever thought that you could consume video potentially in a car, right? Like, it's so mind-boggling. But again, it's all going to be connected to what is with the consumer, the mobile device, their watch, whatever, so that they can just move along throughout their journey of the day, and they can come in and out of watching video as they please. and it really ties back to like the moments that
Right.
you were talking about earlier, right? And that's something to think about. So anyway, obviously I'm passionate about the future and being an entrepreneur. So yeah, so that would be my take on mobile and its place going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's also omnipresent, and then then comes the question of as brands and as an advertiser, then what are the right places to show up there on all those possible screens, right? Because there are so many more, and they're only increasing. And I think when it, another trend I'll mention, just when it comes to all of those screens that are more omnipresent, one that's interesting are the trends behind wearables. I think that's taken some time. We've seen, not everything there has caught on over recent years, but there's opportunities in video to consider, and I think there will want to watch for those opportunities where there's more hyper precision targeting or ways to deliver tailored content in real time. The next two, this will be getting a little more out there on the scale that I mentioned.
I don't know. I love out there, so let's go out there.
It's the fun stuff. I mean, as you look forward, this is the fun stuff. The next I would say is really the concept of the clairvoyant home, which is pretty fascinating. So as you think about connected video enabled devices that are anticipating needs surrounding daily life, we're already there when it comes to the connected home, of course, but I would view this as like the connected home on steroids. Like, it's going to be so interesting to see where that evolves, and where there might be opportunities for brands in it, especially those in CPG. Like I'm picturing maybe a Roomba going around with a video screen on it. I don't know, but it's super interesting for what that might unlock, and then what opportunity does that leave for brands to play.
That I all of a sudden when you said that I thought of R2D2 in Star Wars, right?
Maybe something like that.
The video Princess Leia, like, it's funny.
And then my most out there one I'll say is, and this is probably more much further on the long-term scale, but like, how do you think about the role of something like robotics in the future, and like the role of video there? So if you'll hang with me, like, we're talking about things like video-based, like artificial companionship, could aid in things like childcare, elder care, like not necessarily happening tomorrow, but something that we can think about probably beyond that 3-year, future-proofing time frame. But it's pretty fun to think about if that is in our future. What role does video play there? And then as a brand, do you want to show up there? And if so, like, how would you do that? So pretty fascinating there.
Yeah, it is crazy how time flies. I mean, just unrelated to video. I was just, as you're talking, I thought about, I remember when my brother got married, 12, 14 years ago, and it was through online dating. And now that's like, then it was like, whoa, that was different. Now it's like, it seems like half the marriages are through online dating. So to your point about thinking about the future, right? And those are crazy thoughts, but they really, a lot of them do pan out. Not all of them, right? So
right. When we talk from five years from now, we'll be like, that doesn't feel that far out anymore,
So crazy.
So just a few more thoughts that I'll say, just in addition to those trends, and kind of how we bring that home from a Coca-Cola perspective. In the near term, I think we have to think about video format evolution. Things like social live video that are so inherently interactive. I think there's so many things when you consider the future of video where there's just the whole aspect of it being participatory, and how do we think about that? Also, to the points on wearables, connected home devices, or even those home robotics. What are the opportunities that brands might have to begin to chart the path on what video's role can be in the consumer's life when it comes to those spaces. And I think that's the challenge for brands. And then as consumers, we have and will continue to see, more video screens in our lives than ever before, to your earlier point, whether that's video enabled digital out of home, displays at the bus stop, or a connected display in your kitchen, or, even those next gen displays in your car that we referenced.
Right.
One of the others too that I'll say as well is I think the whole concept of video shoppertainment will be pretty interesting to watch. We see, overall how that can lead to a shortening of the path to purchase with tactics like shoppable video that are out there. But now you're seeing live commerce video content on e-com channels. So I think that there's something super interesting about that, and that'll be something to watch closely as we go forward. So really, all in all, when it comes to this part of future proofing, I think there's so many directions that a brand can go. From my standpoint, the key to our Coca-Cola approach will really just be that spirit of experimentation that I mentioned earlier. And with that, I'll be excited to see what we unlock.
Great. So before we go over to Q&A, is there any last words of advice before we do that?
I can keep it, quite simple there. I think, regardless of your brand or industry, you want to keep a consumer-centric mindset, a future-proofing strategy that's right for you. And I think that culture of experimentation can help, just in unlocking opportunities. That would be the overall winning combination in my book.
Great, thank you. So one of the questions that's coming in, it's like every other question, it's really, maybe I'll break it down into two questions, right? Have you been able to find enough scale in ad-supported video environments for your initiatives? So let's just talk about, is there enough scale out there?
Yeah, I think we see the scale. I think what's key for ensuring that it's where we want it to be, and based on taking it all back to every brand is a little different, and then the problems that we're trying to solve, and the goals for what we're looking to accomplish. There's a mix of where do we want to be, one to many versus one to all versus more one to one. But I think that first area of future proofing, as we think about future proofing mix and targeting, and really having that holistic view of how the presence come to life is how it comes to life is really key for ensuring that we have the proper scale that we need to solve the business problem.
Great. And then the second question that's here a lot is around measurement, right? So if you have the scale, how do you measure? And how do you measure video, right? And so how do you break that down, right? And I know from all of my clients, it's always like, hey, how do we measure, and can we tell what's working and what's not, and invest in what's working, right? And optimize away from what's not. Right. So how do you measure?
Yeah, I had a feeling this one might be coming. So in terms of all of the future proofing areas, I think there's a number of ways you can think about the measurement aspect. I think there's the attitudinal side of it. When you consider, think about consideration. There's the behavioral piece of it when you think about the consumer intent. Of course, from a business perspective, sales, and then the campaign itself when it comes to reach frequency, ROI, and trying to really track those things more so in real time, so that we can optimize more quickly.
Great. Another question that we have here is around DEI initiatives, right? It's every there's obviously a lot of efforts around DEI and all different facets of companies, so specifically for Coca-Cola, and when it comes to for your media buying, what is Coca-Cola specifically doing?
Yeah, so something we announced earlier this summer was in terms of our spend with minority owned and operated media companies. We actually made a commitment that that will account for 8% of the company's annual media budget in North America by 2024. So that's a commitment we publicly made this year, and that does include video as a part of that.
Great, that's awesome. Here's another question around, so we're not specifically asking about what you're doing with the NCAA, but it's more, there's the new NCAA NIL laws. Have you been involved with that? That's like the being able to promote college athletes and then being associated, with different Coca-Cola brands, kind of paying them to be your ambassadors. Is that something you've even looked at yet or considering with video?
So I'll say in that one, I'll give you the personal Chris Elliott take there, because I've transitioned away from the NCAA responsibilities on the team. But I think it's very interesting because there was clearly a lot when it comes to the role of student athletes there that's been brewing for a while, and so I think it'll be super interesting to watch. I don't know exactly what the future will hold in that sense, but definitely will be interesting to see what that does, in the college athletic space, and then in turn with sponsors.
Yeah, it's going to definitely. It's always you got to future proof, right?
Right. Exactly.
Well, I think with that, I think that's it for questions from the audience. So I guess we've come to an end here. So Chris, this has been I've really enjoyed. I mean, obviously we know each other, but I really enjoyed this time that we had on Brand Innovators. So
yeah, appreciate the conversation, Ken.
Awesome. All right. So I think we oh, wait a second. I got one more. This is okay. So we got one more and they're begging for it. And let's see if you can answer this, because I know you're limited what you can or can't say, right? With Coca-Cola's policies. That's very normal for other brands. Considering cord cutting trends, does OTA factor into Coke's future proofing?
I mean, I think, yeah, I feel like, of course, like with the cord cutting trends, I would say that's really something that is, lying underneath like all of those areas of future proofing that's impacting all of it. So I think it's embedded there. Absolutely.
Makes sense. All right, Paul, I guess we're back to you.
Yeah, that was a long conversation. So thanks guys for sticking with it. It was great content you shared. I saw a couple of things that were mentioned on this call, on this session, that were also mentioned in other sessions. And it was really about this holistic look at the media plan and not relying on a single channel to do too much. Media partners, agency partners, we have a responsibility to the brands that we serve in doing that. BlackRock said it, Kimberly-Clark said it, LVMH said it. Chris, something else you said that really stuck with me: making our brand unmissable for consumers. And I did look that up to make sure that was, a real word. I didn't get spell checked on it, so it is legit. So it's really good. And QR codes, they're back. I don't know if anybody's been out and traveling. I had the opportunity to travel across the country this summer with my son, and everywhere we went was Q code driven. So that was really good. So thank you both. It was a really good conversation. You guys stuck with it a long time. You were our longest session today. So I know Brand Innovators, on behalf of everyone, we want to say thank you to you. Let's keep